Welcome to Jim Cantelon Today. This is Bible study for the 21st century. How you doing, friends? Jim Cantelon here. You're in for a treat today. Not just because I'm doing a Bible study, because of my interview guest, Musi Maimani. Maybe not a household name in Canada yet, but if you follow world events, you know that he is the rising star in South African politics. He is a leader of the Democratic Alliance, which is the official opposition, and he's really making waves in that marvelous country at the southern tip of Africa. He's coming up on this program.
Everyone has a story. We'd love to hear about yours. Write to us and tell us about it. JimCantelonToday.com.
Now, you'll remember, I hope, from our last week's Bible study that we looked at Matthew 21, where Jesus comes into the temple area of Jerusalem with great hurrahs, hosannas from the people. It's what we now refer to as the triumphal entry. And I talked then about the meaning of hosanna. I'm not going to go over old territory, but the fact of the matter was that they thought that finally Jesus was going to show his hand. Finally, he's going to establish the throne in Jerusalem. Finally, he's going to chase out the Romans. Finally, he's going to establish the Messianic kingdom, and all of the world will be ruled out of Jerusalem. That was their expectation. And of course, Jesus didn't fulfill their expectation, not in their terms. Well, leaving that behind, we now come to verses 12 to 17 of chapter 21. Let's read it first of all. Then Jesus went into the temple of God and drove out all those who bought and sold in the temple, overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. He said to them, "It is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves." Then the blind and the lame came to him in the temple, and he healed them. But when the chief priests and scribes saw the wonderful things that he did, and the children crying out in the temple and saying, "Hosanna to the Son of David," they were indignant and said to him, "Do you hear what these are saying?" And Jesus said to them, "Yes, have you never read, out of the mouths of babes and nursing infants you have perfected praise?" I'm just back from Africa. In fact, as I am now speaking to you, I have been up since 4:30 in the morning. I couldn't sleep. I got in late last night from Africa, and jet lag being what it is. So if I fall asleep in the middle of this, you'll understand. But on the way back from Africa, my wife and I dropped in to Rome for a couple of days. It was on the way, and we had a little anniversary celebration. And of course, we went to the Vatican. There were, without exaggeration, hundreds of thousands of people in Rome these last few days. And apparently they tell me they'll continue to be there right through to the end of October. It's high season right now, September, October. We didn't know that. You can't go anywhere in Rome on any of the streets downtown without shoulder to shoulder and bumping into people and people bumping into you. And when you go to the Vatican, whether it's St. Peter's or the Vatican Museum, which is a favorite place for us, it's just people, 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 people everywhere. And I'm not making any negative observation here. All I'm saying is that surrounded by those tens of thousands of people, I thought of the many times when the Israelites, both of Judah and Israel, would come up to the temple in Jerusalem during the High Holy Days or during Passover or other very special celebrations where people were expected to be there and they were expected to be making sacrifices, and they would be surrounded not only with people, but tens of thousands of sheep and goats and cattle. An absolute confusion. And of course, surrounding the temple were merchant stalls. Some of them were selling doves to those who were poor, who couldn't afford a lamb, because a dove from a poor person was accepted as a sacrifice at the temple. But there were people changing money because these people came from various countries, around Israel and Asia Minor and so on, coming up to Jerusalem, which is still a term that's used for immigrants who are coming to Israel. It's called making aliyah, coming up to. So there'd be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of merchants surrounding the temple, and they're all doing business, legitimate business, but it was business that was controlled by the Sadducean priestly caste. The Sadducees, who were the Hellenistic Jews, were also the priestly elite, and they were the ones that controlled the priesthood. And as controllers of the priesthood, they also controlled the temple, and they controlled the temple economy. So every one of those merchants had to give a certain percentage, to the coffers of the Sadducees, the temple elite, the priests. Okay. Well, Jesus comes in and he sees what's going on. He knows what's going on, and he's angered by what he realizes is happening, and that's a lot of extortion and graft, unrighteousness, injustice. The poor are being squeezed again, as seems to be always the case. The Sadducees controlled these markets under the ownership of the high priest and his family. And so even as Jesus is attacking these merchants, he's attacking the priestly caste, which of course didn't go down very well at all. But he was also attacking something else. He was attacking religious nationalism. There was a slogan that was very common in those days, Jerusalem for the Jews, a religious nationalistic slogan. And I'm not putting the Jews down here. I mean, we've heard of America for the Americans, okay? Canada for the Canadians, Britain for the British, especially in these days with all the controversy surrounding immigration. That kind of nationalism is more than finding its way into the common culture. But Jesus understood that Jerusalem was for all nations. He also understood that his house was to be a house of prayer, not a house of commerce. And so as he is wreaking havoc there, he shouts out, "My house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations." So it's not for commerce, it's for prayer. It's not just for one ethnic group, it's for all nations. The house of graft is what it had become under the priestly caste. Micah, or I should say Malachi, in chapter 3, verses 1 and 2, I want to quote him here. He says, "The Lord shall suddenly come to his temple, but who may abide the day of his coming?" Doesn't Handel include that in Handel's Messiah? I think so. Later in 70 AD, Titus, the Roman strongman, destroyed the temple. But in many ways, the Sadducean priestly caste had already destroyed it. And Jesus was just expressing, a righteous indignation at it becoming a house of commerce and a house of religious nationalism. That's really what's going on here. But then, as we read in verses 14 and 15, then the blind and the lame came to him in the temple, okay? So the temple is totally chaotic because of what Jesus has just done there. And yet, those who had great physical need, they were the ones that comprised the thousands and thousands and thousands of people that followed Jesus throughout the course of his ministry. They see beyond the chaos to the fact that, they have a lame leg, or they have eyes that don't see, or they have a son who's dying, or whatever the case may be. And they don't really care about the commerce. They don't really care about the religious nationalism. They don't even care that my house should be called a house of prayer. What they cared about was This is the healer, and we need healing. So they came to him in the temple, and he healed them. This is a remarkable thing, really, when you think about it. Jesus having the presence of mind and the compassion to see beyond the anger of the moment, the chaos that he had caused, and you can be sure the mounting displeasure and raising the alarm on the part of the priestly caste. And he's moved to heal these poor, pathetic souls, who in some cases had probably been following him for a few days. We see again and again in the scripture, Jesus had compassion on these people who followed him. You know, he wasn't showing off. He wasn't, being the big healer. He didn't have a, big prayer letter that he sent out to his supporters. He was just, a rabbi from the Galilee. And yet he had this special capacity to see and feel what people were feeling and to heal them with the divine power that he possessed as the Son of God. I'm going to pick up on this next time because I think this is a really important passage we're dealing with here, and then we'll shift to the next. But I just want to say this, friends. What do you expect when you go to the house of God? I think I know what you expect. Having been a pastor all my life, you want a touch from the Lord. You want to have a sense that God knows your name, and he hears your prayer, and he sees your need. You're not there just to go through some kind of religious exercise. You may want to hear the preacher. Hopefully you do. Some preachers are really good and have a real ability to make the word of the Lord live for you, which feeds your soul. But ultimately, what you want from the house of God is not commerce, not a political discourse. You want to be touched by the Lord. And I would encourage you, next time you go to the house of the Lord, go there with expectation. Go there believing that the Lord will indeed touch your life. After this short break, Musi Mamani from South Africa is my guest.
Jim Cantelon Today is a program dedicated to the teaching of the good news of Jesus Christ. This all through the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. JCT also brings to you encouraging testimonies and stories from Christian leaders all over the globe. If this program has added value to your life, would you please consider becoming a partner? To do so, simply contact us by phone, mail, or online.
Musi Mamani is a young South African politician. Some of you have heard of him, many of you have not, and you're going to meet him for the first time, not only with this program, but over the next 4 programs during the course of this month. I've known Musi since he was a young man. He still is a young man. But I knew him when he was pastoring a little church in Cosmos City in South Africa, here in Johannesburg. He was pastoring in a larger context a few years later, and then entered into politics. And to no one's real surprise, he had a kind of mercurial rise to the point where he is now the leader of the official opposition, the Democratic Alliance, in South Africa. Everybody in North America is interested in South Africa. There's no question about it. And to sit down with this man is just a true privilege. Musi, thanks for coming our way.
No, Jim.
Mind you, I came your way. I'm with you.
Yeah.
Here in South Africa, but you came to the studio. You're a busy man. We have some time. You were born in Soweto, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Back when I was pastoring in Jerusalem, Israel, I used to come down to do conferences and conventions. That's before the fall of apartheid. And I had people warn me not to go to Soweto, but I did anyway. I went to a wedding in Soweto and just was almost immersed in the experience. What was it like growing up in Soweto?
Firstly, thank you for having me, and it's my great privilege to be here. And I think Soweto is an incredible place. Soweto, for an international audience, was a segregated community for exclusively black South Africans, really a labor sending center for the government of the day. So all of us would wake up in the morning to watch our parents catch transport to places of work, and almost in some ways for them it was like going to a different world. It was a world where there was a different race and a different economy. But none could forget the fact that there are a few things that are very stark in my mind and about Soweto as a child. One is it was almost the epicenter of politics. This is where people like Nelson Mandela and Archbishop Desmond Tutu and all of them grew up, well, lived. And so in communities, even though when I was growing up Nelson Mandela was in Robben Island, you could hear stories of Mandela. Many political intellectuals were there. It also had dark days. It was dark days where it was very violent in Soweto. During apartheid, it was a lot of time where the police would declare states of emergency, and therefore Soweto would be on lockdown. I have days where I'd go to school and have to leave early because they'd shut down the school or the police were looking for something. But lastly, it was the epicenter of culture. It was beautiful. Soweto is a beautiful place. I played football in the dusty streets. It was a vibrant place. And in some ways, I can look back at it now, but living through it, it was a normal community. Neighbors, alive, football, the stories, the community, the music. I would never in any universe trade off my growth in Soweto. It was powerful.
Did the ANC have its genesis in Soweto, or was Soweto a player in the early DNA structure of the ANC?
It was a massive place because the ANC in its foundations was in Bloemfontein, which is about 400 km from there. The big advantage behind Soweto was that it was this place, because it was the closest, biggest black township to Johannesburg, and Johannesburg was an attraction of work and all of that. Many people would come from all parts of the country to come and find work in Joburg and end up living in Soweto. So in many ways it was this township where ANC leaders would come and descend upon there. And it was the closest place where you had white South Africans who were pro the struggle for freedom would find a place to interact. It was certainly close enough to Johannesburg, and but segregated enough away from that. So, the beauty of Soweto is that it wasn't just the political leadership, it was also editors of newspapers. You had teachers, you had intellectuals. And so it became this place where you could sit in places and listen up for conversation. And of course, famously, before I was born, the 1976 riots took place here in Soweto, where students took to the streets demanding to be taught in English as a language or a different language. So they taught in their own language rather than Afrikaans, which is the language of apartheid. But it just was, Soweto became that place, not only for the ANC, but for SASCO, which was another movement, the IFP, and many political formations, AZAPU, were big players in Soweto. And so it was this cosmopolitan place of political interface.
So it was a petri dish for a lot of creativity, but as you suggest, also there were various political movements taking life there. Were you ever subject to attempts to radicalize you as a young guy growing up in Soweto?
Completely. As a child, I can remember thinking the contest for me was not black versus white at times. It was the violence between Zulu nationalism vis-a-vis everybody else. Violence as a means of a political end was also part of the fabric of Soweto. If you were a young boy, you didn't have a choice. You played football, and on another day you had to learn very quickly how to get involved in political mobilization. So I always jokingly say to people, before I learned how to ride a bike, I knew how to make a petrol bomb. Because you could pretty much, that was part of what you did. You didn't ask the questions. You maybe didn't understand the broader implications of it, but that was the social context within which you operated. I happened to have had the great privilege of being educated in a Catholic primary school. So my language skills were better, and therefore it became very natural that even for the community and some of the branches in our community, they'd be quick to say, Musi, you need to write this letter and you need to write this statement. And so that became in part the first entry bit to say, think about politics.
Yeah, public service at an early age. I've been amazed when I've interviewed politicians generally, how they're almost like pastors in the sense they have a sense of calling to public service. Pastors may have a calling to, service of the church, but it's more than just something you do. It's something you feel a passion about, right?
You'd have to, because politics is not an easy career by any matter of means. It's got its own challenges. It's a difficult job. So
Was Nelson Mandela larger than life at this point in time? I mean, he was in Robben Island. He was in prison. You're a kid growing up. There's all of this, stuff going on. Was he the man? Was he the one who everyone saw as the ultimate champion for freedom for South Africa?
Without trying to sound too irreligious or anything like that, Nelson Mandela represented to South Africa a type of messianic feature, someone who all people were waiting for. The theme at the time was bring back Nelson Mandela, because if Nelson Mandela came back from prison, we knew the struggles of Africans would be over. It began this journey. And so Nelson Mandela was this larger than life figure, which very few people had met to in Soweto. Very few people, I certainly never had met him, but yet here he was this feature. And it was epitomized in 1990 when Nelson Mandela was released, how powerful a moment that was. How it felt like Jubilee. It felt like you could shut down everything. In fact, everything was shut down in Soweto. I remember that day, including the Soccer World Cup, including perhaps maybe the inauguration of President Nelson Mandela. That day is probably the largest party Soweto has ever had. It was incredible, and his first address being there. And therefore it was always, here you had this figure who was powerful in the nation and certainly represented the hopes and aspirations of so many people.
Musi, to the world, Nelson Mandela became a statesman, and what he was. In his statesman-like stature, was he a disappointment to some of the more radical elements who wanted him to create some kind of a civil war against apartheid?
I mean, I think if you're gonna, you've got to love all of Nelson Mandela's. The Nelson Mandela was the lawyer, and very astute in how he argued in court. You have to love the Nelson Mandela who became very radical and started armed struggle, which has made sure that, in fact, he became an enemy to the state. But you've also got to love Nelson Mandela, the reconciler. And I think all of those make up who he is, and that's why it makes him such a great individual, is that not only was he able to, as one author once wrote, learn and unlearn certain things, he did. He was a person who was changed. The power behind it was that, and this is something that I most admire about Nelson Mandela, is that the radicals in many ways always seek to divide. It almost can feel like one must win over another. Nelson Mandela was able to confront his own, to say the better route to go is to be together, however painful, however difficult that is. And even fast forward today to 2018, a number of years after Nelson Mandela's death, a number of years after, there are others who are looking backwards and saying Nelson Mandela sold us out because he pursued this dream of a united South Africa. Whereas it probably was the boldest thing. It's a bit like love may seem a soft emotion in contrast to hatred, but yet love is always the strongest of the lot because it lasts the longest. It's the one that is carried the longest.
Cantelon's Casual Commentary Volume 3 is here. This booklet covers Matthew chapters 8 through 16, and Jesus' signs and wonders play a major role. Lepers are healed, the dead are raised, nature is subdued, demons are cast out, and Jesus and Peter walk on water. Jesus' teaching both in parables and one-on-one with the disciples is captured in detail. We'd like you to have your copy of Cantelon's Casual Commentary Volume 3. If you're already a monthly partner, it will be sent out to you automatically in the next few weeks. If you'd like to order Volume 3, you can call us 519-415-8341 or write to Jim Cantelon Today, P.O. Box 989, Burlington, Ontario, L7R3Y7, or visit us online, jimcantelontoday.com. Request Cantelon's Casual Commentary Volume 3, and for a gift in any amount, it will be sent out to you.
A lot of you friends are asking, mailing or emailing or whatever for Cantelon's Casual Commentary. There are 3 volumes now, and I'm producing them in these sizes so that I can put them in an envelope and mail them to you. And it's a lot cheaper doing it that way. But the third one here goes right, where's the third one? Here we go. Goes right through to the 16th chapter of Matthew. And the fourth one is in the works. When you ask for yours, please remember this show, okay? We survive on your support. Even these little booklets cost a lot of money to produce, about $3,000 each, just to produce them in the numbers necessary to send them out to you. Everything costs money. Television costs money. Airtime costs money. I mean, that's the way it is. So we really rely on your help, and I really appreciate those of you helping us, especially if you can do it on a monthly basis. I just want to mention that, as I said earlier, I'm just back from Africa. And I was visiting there with our ministry partners in South Africa, in Malawi, and in Zambia. What we do is we work with the lowest of the low, the least of these, dying orphans and widows. This is the calling the Lord gave me years ago when we started Vision Led, which now is called WOW, which means Working for Orphans and Widows. This program is absolutely unapologetic. We are a missionary program. We are teaching the Word, hoping to fulfill the righteousness quotient, but reaching out to orphans and widows, hoping to fulfill the justice quotient. Like any good church, you gotta have a strong pulpit. Here's my pulpit. You gotta have strong missions. And wow, Working for Orphans and Widows is our mission. I could tell you so many stories, and I'm going to tell you some stories over time and show you some pictures and some footage of some of the heart-rending scenes that my wife Kathy and I have just seen over these last few weeks in Africa. So remember to support JCT and WOW as well. Together we're going to make a difference in our world. Thanks for watching.
Contact us. Jim Cantelon Today, P.O. Box 989, Burlington, Ontario, L7R3Y7. If you're sending a check, make it payable to Jim Cantelon Today. Or visit us online at jimcantelontoday.com and click Support.